It was always the vowels that got me in trouble, not the language, I spoke 3, not the guests who loved me, not the job, because I did more than what was asked every single shift. No, it was just the way my vowels held a little heat. A, little too much song, the kind of sound that reminded people I didn't come from where the wallpaper whispered old money and the chandeliers dangled like upside-down crowns. "Marisol, sweetheart, I need you back in laundry," said Mr. Claiborne, not looking up from his clipboard. "It's a big conference week and front desk needs a, polished look." He said polished like it meant white. He said sweetheart like I should thank him for not saying immigrant. I didn't argue. I just smiled the way my mother taught. Me, wide, warm, controlled, and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Claiborne." It was the 3rd time this month I'd been rotated off the desk to help with laundry. But the front desk was my favorite post. I loved checking guests in, asking about their travels, telling them which side of the hotel had the better sunrise view. I loved recommending pupusa trucks and little hidden jazz spots, not just the safe laminated binder options. I loved making the tired business travelers feel just a little more human. And I was good at it. But that never mattered much here. At the Archibald, a mid-range boutique hotel wedged between the financial district and the freeway, everything was coded. The manager called it brand tone. What he meant was don't sound too Southern, too Spanish, too anything other than beige. Front desk girls had to look like they'd gone to college with the guests' daughters. Everyone else wore black and stayed invisible. That afternoon I folded towels in the basement while listening to a Spanish-language podcast about real estate investments in California. Not because I wanted to buy a house, because I wanted to buy this hotel. That was my secret. They thought I didn't know what I was worth. They thought a name tag was all I had. But I'd been saving. 3 jobs, no vacations, nights working the front desk and weekends assisting my cousin's catering business. I never told anyone, not even my roommate. But I had dreams with blueprints, dreams with spreadsheets. I wrote them down every night in a little red notebook. 10-year plan. Buy a building, train people like me. No accent shaming, no back-of-house exile. But back then I was still in year 6, and the worst part was I still believed just a little that if I worked hard enough, they'd let me shine right there at the front desk. That's why it hurt when I heard it. I was taking clean towels. Up the back stairs when I passed the break room. The door was cracked. Inside, Mr. Claiborne was talking to Julia, front desk lead, who wore pearls like armor and applied to HR every time someone microwaved fish. "She's nice enough," Julia was saying, "but it's just that accent. It throws people off. Like it sounds like the maid's checking you in." Mr. Claiborne chuckled. "Exactly. This isn't a telenovela, it's a boutique experience. We need elegance, consistency." I stood there for a second. The towels felt heavier. I didn't walk in, didn't say a word, just kept walking. But that night I took out my red notebook, flipped past the budgeting notes, the floor plans, the real estate listings clipped from the Sunday paper, and I wrote something new. They want consistency, I'll give them permanence. They want elegance, I'll own the damn chandelier. The basement always smelled like bleach and buried dreams. You could feel it in the cinder, block walls and the broken vending machine, the one that still charged $2.75 for a bottle of water that never dropped. There were no windows, just the buzz of overhead fluorescents and the hum of the industrial dryer that rattled like an old man, coughing in his sleep. But I liked it down there. No one watched you in the basement, and that meant no one noticed when you were building something. That night after my shift ended, I stayed late. Told the overnight manager I was waiting on a friend to pick me up. He didn't care. He barely looked up from his phone, just shrugged and said, "Don't forget to sign out." I waited until the hotel quieted. After midnight, after the last guest complaint, after the lobby fell asleep under soft jazz and dim chandelier light, then I pulled out my red notebook. cleared off the long folding table we used for towel sorting, and laid out the copy I'd made of the hotel's original blueprints, scanned from a city permit site, printed for 12 cents a page at the public library. It wasn't just sentiment. I needed to understand this place, its bones, its age. Its cracks, because that's where opportunity lives, in the things people forget to fix. The Archibald had good bones, the kind developers liked, 6 floors plus basement, original crown molding in some rooms, a rooftop view of the downtown skyline, if you leaned just right. But more than that, it was struggling. The conference bookings were down. A second-rate app had called it vintage, which in hospitality was code for outdated. Guests still came, but not the kind who tipped. Not the kind who stayed for 3 nights and ordered wine with room service. And I was tracking everything. I had notes on turnover, the broken espresso machine that no one ever fixed, the mold in room 507, the corner suite that sat empty because of a broken window seal no one wanted to spend money on. I even knew how much we wasted on dry cleaning. I'd counted the invoices myself when I filled in at night audit. They saw a girl with a name they stumbled over. I saw a business bleeding from 100 tiny cuts. The next morning, I went to the east side of town. The building was nothing special, just a strip of squat offices behind a payday loan sign. But inside I met with Arturo Morales, a real estate agent who used to be a client of my cousin's catering business. I had served him flan at his wife's 50th birthday party, and remembered how carefully he cleaned the table before leaving. Respect like that stays with me. Marisol, he said, raising his eyebrows when I slid the Archibald's data sheets across his desk. You're serious. I'm ready. He didn't laugh, didn't try to mansplain commercial equity to me. He just nodded and started reading. We spent 2 hours talking about financing, business loans, interest-only plans. He gave me 3 names. Small banks, not the big boys who'd want collateral I didn't have. One of them worked specifically with minority women entrepreneurs. I wrote every detail down like I was taking notes for my future self. You've done your homework, Arturo said finally, closing the folder. But why this hotel? It's not in a growth zone, not exactly prime. I looked him in the eye. Because they told me I didn't belong at the front desk. His eyes softened, and he didn't ask another question. Back at work, I was sent to housekeeping that week. Julia said they were restructuring roles, which apparently meant demoting the girl with the bilingual charm guests remembered to the team that changed pillowcases in silence. Fine by me. Less talking. More time to plan. While I scrubbed shower, grout and restocked coffee pods, I listened to audiobooks on business acquisitions and hospitality branding. I ran profit-loss calculations in my head like other people hum music, and I started watching Claiborne. He always parked in the handicap spot, even though he walked just fine. He always held meetings in the same conference room and left printouts behind when he left. That's how I learned the Archibald was preparing to sell quietly. The parent company wanted to cut underperforming assets. They planned to offload 3 hotels before Q4. I took a picture of the meeting agenda left on the conference table, then calmly pushed in the chairs like I was never there. They had no idea the girl they shoved into the basement was reading the fine print on their future. And the future, I was about to own it. Every Friday morning, the new hires at the Archibald were herded into the Magnolia Room for brand alignment orientation. I knew the script by heart. Julia would stand stiff and proud in her navy blazer, her hair in a tight bun that made her look like someone's aunt with a clipboard. She'd speak in the same careful tone she used with guests she suspected might ask to speak to someone in charge. We offer understated elegance, she'd say, as if she had written the phrase herself. We don't do flash. We don't do slang. We provide the kind of experience that says, you're taken care of, but you won't need to remember our names. That line always made me grit my teeth, because names matter. Mine was Marisol. Not Mari, not Miss, not, can I just call you M? But I kept my head down, because now I wasn't here for their approval. I was here for their balance sheets. The day I got the email, I was in the employee break room, my phone tucked behind a cereal box of generic Raisin Bran we used to prop up the TV remote. It buzzed 3 times in a row, ping, 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 and I knew it had to be Arturo. Subject: preliminary valuation and listing terms. It's official. They're asking 4.2 metis, but it's negotiable. Interested buyers must submit LOI by end of quarter. Your numbers stack. Let's meet. My hands shook so hard I dropped a spoon. I stared at the number. 4.2 million. It was more than I had, more than anyone I knew had, more than anything I'd ever imagined holding power over, but not more than I could figure out. The hotel wasn't worth that on paper. I knew that because I was the paper. I'd seen the worn-out carpet they refused to replace. I'd folded the stained linens they still put in executive rooms. I'd read the maintenance reports nobody filed properly. They were overvaluing the brand and underestimating the cracks, which meant I had leverage. Now I just had to find the right partners. That night, I clocked out and took the 46 bus to the west side, where the buildings got older, but the people had fire in their bones. I met with Mrs. Benitez, the owner of a small but thriving bakery that had managed to franchise 3 locations without ever hiring a marketing firm. She remembered me from when I'd helped serve at her daughter's quinceañera 5 years ago. I showed her my plan, my breakdown, my vision for a Latinx-owned boutique hotel that celebrated local culture without sacrificing polish. Instead of generic corporate art, local muralists, instead of overpriced bland wine at the bar, sangria made with her family's own recipe, instead of hiding accents. We'd make language a luxury, multilingual staff, Spanish jazz, menus in both English and pride. She sat back in her seat, arms crossed, and then she smiled. Everyone thinks we clean buildings. They forget we can own them too. Back at the hotel, Claiborne was unraveling. The sale hadn't gone public yet, but we all saw the signs. He started showing up later, started snapping at staff in front of guests, kept ordering branded chocolates we couldn't afford, and talking about reviving the brand image like the solution to declining bookings was shinier foil wrappers. And then one afternoon, he pulled me aside. I was wiping down the hallway mirrors near the elevator when I saw his reflection pause behind mine. Marisol, a word. I followed him into the back office, where he closed the door and leaned on the desk like we were about to have a mentoring moment. I wanted to say, he started, I've noticed you've been quiet lately. I stayed silent. He cleared his throat. You know, there's room to grow here for people who are team players, if you just polish things a little. Your look, your speech, branding matters, Marisol. I blinked. Branding matters. I wanted to laugh or scream or both, but instead I said, thanks for the feedback. I'll keep that in mind. He smiled like he'd done something noble, but inside, something in me clicked. Not rage, not shame, just this calm fire. I didn't want his approval. I wanted his parking space. The first time I walked into the bank as a buyer, not a borrower, I wore a navy dress with clean lines and a borrowed coat that didn't quite fit in the shoulders. Arturo met me outside with a firm handshake and a binder so thick it looked like a lawsuit. Remember, he said as we crossed the marble lobby together, you're not asking permission, you're making an offer. Inside, the vice president of small business lending was a middle-aged woman named Cheryl, with silver-gray curls and an expression that weighed people before they spoke. I could tell the moment she looked at me that she thought I was here to open a cleaning account, or maybe ask about student loans. Then Arturo placed the binder on the table, and I laid out my cash reserve summary, business plan, and 12-month stabilization model. Cheryl didn't say much for the first 15 minutes, but I watched her eyes shift. Curiosity replacing dismissal, calculation replacing condescension. When I finally finished walking her through my projected occupancy increases and cost-saving measures, she tapped her pen against the desk and smiled, like a chess player who'd just been outplayed. "You built all this?" "Yes," she nodded slowly. "And you've worked at this hotel how long?" 6 years, I said. "I know every pipe that leaks and every guest complaint that never got logged. I don't just want to buy the Archibald. I know how to fix it." She sat back, eyes narrowing, not in doubt, but in assessment. "Let's talk terms." 2 weeks later, I submitted the official letter of intent. My offer was lower than asking, $345 million, but it came with specifics. A 60-day due diligence period. Full operational control upon signing. No public announcement until close. I promised to retain existing staff for 90 days minimum. Arturo said it was bold. I knew it was necessary, because time was running out. Rumors were beginning to swirl. Julia had started holding private meetings with department heads. Claiborne was suddenly nice to me, offering coffee, smiling like we shared some unspoken alliance. It was like watching a captain smile on a sinking ship he swore was still floating. They didn't know the leak was coming from me. At home I ate beans and rice 5 nights a week. No extras, no movies, no rideshare apps. Every cent mattered. I sold the catering gear I hadn't used in months. I let go of the iPhone and got a burner flip to keep calls separate from the hotel. My roommate asked questions I didn't answer. Just told her I was working on something. In the quiet, I visualized the lobby as I'd design it. Lush green plants, art from local Latinx creators, quiet music in Spanish guitar instead of that overplayed spa jazz. The uniforms would change. The voices would change. There would be color. There would be culture. There would be me right there at the front desk, not standing behind it. Not just as an employee, as the owner. Then one morning it happened, and email from Cheryl's office, subject line preliminary approval, conditional loan terms enclosed. I opened it in the staff hallway behind the front desk, standing in the same spot where I once overheard Julia call my voice too much like the help. The terms weren't perfect, a high interest rate, a balloon clause, but it was doable. I had 3 investors, Benitez's Bakery, a small urban development nonprofit, and Arturo himself, ready to back me with equity. I stood there, blinking, the fluorescent lights above buzzing softly, as if the whole building was holding its breath. I had done it. I had a foot in the door, and just as I was about to put my phone away, a voice crackled over the staff radio, clipped to my belt. "Marisol, come to the front desk, please. Guest complaint. Room 412. Something about a language barrier. Julia wants you to handle it." Of course she did. I smoothed my apron, clipped the radio back on, and walked toward the lobby with my spine straight and chin high. They still saw me as a patch job for their broken PR moments, but I was no longer patching. I was laying the foundation. Room 412 smelled like regret and too much cologne. The guest stood stiffly by the window, arms folded, wearing a blazer that still had the plastic thread from a price tag dangling from the armpit. His suitcase was cracked leather. His shoes gleamed. But it was the tone in his voice that told me everything. He didn't want help, he wanted hierarchy. I said, he repeated, "I asked the girl at the desk if the concierge spoke proper English, and she sent me you. I don't mean to be rude. Well, I kind of do, but this is not what I expect from a professional establishment." He waved his hand vaguely like he was shooing away the smell of seasoning. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just smiled the way I always did when someone expected me to be smaller than I was. "Of course, sir," I said in the calmest, most melodic tone I had. "I'm here to help. Is there a particular request I can assist you with?" He scoffed. "I need tickets To the Gala Expo. Business section. Preferably front, and I'd prefer someone fluent to handle it. I paused just long enough for it to be noticeable. Then I smiled again. I see, I'll take care of it personally. And I did. Found the tickets, even got them discounted through a local vendor I knew from one of my side gigs. Delivered them. Back in a crisp envelope with his name spelled flawlessly in gold ink. He didn't thank me. Didn't need to. Because I wasn't there for thanks. I was there to memorize how it felt to be dismissed, so I'd never forget what not to become when I had the keys. The following Monday, the corporate regional director came to tour the Archibald. That meant white gloves, extra polish on the brass fixtures, and Claiborne in a navy suit 2 sizes too tight, barking orders like a man hosting a dinner party in a crumbling house. The staff was jittery, but I had a different pulse that day. Had just received the final confirmation from the real estate office. My offer had made it to the final round of consideration. The sellers board was meeting within the week to vote. And thanks to Arturo's guidance, my numbers had outshined both competitors, one of them a franchise developer who wanted to turn the Archibald into a discount chain. All I had to do now was keep quiet and wait. But quiet was a currency I was running low on. I was in the storage closet restocking toilet paper when I overheard Claiborne again. He was on the phone, door cracked like always, talking to someone on Bluetooth. No, she's not a problem. She's loyal. Besides, she's Latina, makes the place look diverse. HR loves it. He laughed. Loyal. Like I was a retriever. Like I wasn't building a future beneath his nose. I closed the closet door gently and walked back into the hallway, heart hammering in my chest. Not from anger, but from certainty. This wasn't just about owning a building anymore. It was about reclaiming the right to take up space, to never again be someone's cover story for corporate diversity, to never again be praised for smiling through disrespect. That night, Julia cornered me at the time clock. She stood with one hand on her hip, eyes sharp, clipboard clutched like a shield. "You've been acting. Distracted," she said. "I hope you're not letting things get to your head. Claiborne told me you've been stepping outside your role lately." I tilted my head. "My role?" "You know what I mean," she said. "Housekeeping. Occasional. Guest services. That's where you shine. Let's not confuse potential with ambition, okay?" Her voice was sugar over steel. I nodded slowly, smiled again. But this time my smile felt different. It wasn't soft. It was steel covered in velvet. "Course, Julia," I said. "Wouldn't want to confuse anyone." And I walked away, her words falling behind me like breadcrumbs no one would bother to pick up, because in 4 days, if the vote went through, I wouldn't be clocking out. I'd be inheriting the keys they thought I'd never hold. Thursday started. Like any other shift. I wore my usual black button-up and khakis, tied my hair back and clocked in at 6:58 a.m. sharp. Julia gave me that tight-lipped look as I walked past the front desk. She didn't say good morning. She never did anymore. It was the kind of quiet that smelled like suspicion. She had good instincts. By noon, I had refilled every cart, double-checked every minibar, and restocked backup linens before anyone asked. I kept my steps steady and my eyes open. I smiled when spoken to. I worked like a girl with a future hanging from a string, because I knew what was happening across town. In a conference room near 3rd and Main, 3 members of the Archibald's corporate board were reviewing final bids. They had no idea one of the applicants was rolling guest towels while their assistant printed the agenda. But I knew. Arturo had texted me just after 11. In session, looking good, fingers crossed. By 3 p.m. the hotel was buzzing, not with guests, but with tension. Claiborne was pacing the halls in that frantic way he did when he sensed something. Bigger than him was in motion. He'd heard rumblings of a sale but didn't know the details. Not yet. The board kept everything hush-hush until after the vote. No leaks, no early alerts to local management, but I could feel it shifting. Like the air before a thunderstorm, a pressure that made the walls buzz and the floors feel soft. By 3:42 p.m. my phone buzzed again. This time it was Arturo. Just 2 words. It passed. I stood there, frozen in the back corridor next to the laundry chute, staring at those 2 syllables like they were sacred text. It passed. My offer had been accepted. Pending final documents and legal review, I would soon be the new owner of the Archibald Hotel. I pressed a hand to my chest, not to be dramatic, just to remind myself I still had a heartbeat, that I was still grounded, that this wasn't some fantasy in a red notebook, scribbled next to minimum wage shifts and whispered prayers. This was happening, and I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to run into the lobby and shout it from the fountain. No, I was going to finish my shift, because dignity was a kind of armor. I folded 4 more bedsheets, smiled at 3 more guests, brought a rollaway bed to a family from Cleveland whose kids were fighting over who got the couch. I asked them if they wanted extra juice boxes and brought warm cookies from the kitchen without telling anyone. That's who I was, who I'd always been. I didn't need the name tag to prove it anymore. At 6:15 p.m., Claiborne pulled me into the manager's office. He looked tired, too much stress, too little authority. I sat across from him as he cleared his throat and said, "There's some news from upstairs." I nodded like I didn't know. "The hotel's being sold," he said. "Some private group, small investors. I'm not sure what their angle is, but we'll find out soon. They'll probably send a rep next week." He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "You've been here a long time, Marisol. I want you to know, if there are cuts or changes, I'll put in a good word. You're loyal. You've been useful." Useful. I nodded again. "Thank you, Mr. Claiborne." He gave me a look like I should be grateful, like he'd just handed me a golden ticket to survive the purge. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because in 2 weeks, when the papers were signed and the press release went out, when I walked through that door, not in a uniform, but in heels and ownership, he'd realize I wasn't the one needing a good word. The ink wasn't even dry on the contract when the gossip started. One of the front desk agents, a part-timer named Kendra who loved drama more than tips, overheard Claiborne on the phone. "They're not corporate," he said. "They're private, independent, and the weird part, they're local." Kendra didn't know what it meant, but I did. The moment I signed the buyer's agreement, everything changed, but quietly. That was the beauty of a transition period. It gave me time to prepare, to watch, to decide who stayed, who rose, and who had been resting too comfortably behind a desk they never earned. The legal closing was scheduled for 17 days from the board's vote. Until then, I was just Marisol, still folding sheets, still bringing ice buckets, still being asked if I spoke good enough English by guests who thought I was invisible. But each time I looked at the walls, the lights, the chipped corner of the concierge desk Julia never noticed, I saw something else. Mine Arturo advised me to keep everything quiet. "Let them underestimate you a little longer," he said. "It'll mean more when they see your name on the papers." So I said nothing. Not when Julia handed me a new schedule with an extra Sunday shift. Not when Claiborne asked me to cover another late night because you know how to deal with the weird guests. Not when a visiting sales rep from the parent company asked if I was part of the cleaning service, then chuckled when I corrected her. I stayed silent. But every night I went home and wrote in my red notebook. Crossed off line items. Find investor. Done. Get approval. Done. Submit LOI. Done. Get accepted. Done. Closing documents pending. Prepare internal changes. In progress. First staff meeting. Soon. 10 days before the handover, I received the welcome packet. It came in a flat envelope, embossed with my initials and the logo of the holding company Arturo helped me form, Sol Y Luna Hospitality LLC, a name that meant something. A name that came from my mother, who worked 2 jobs in Bakersfield and used to whisper, "One day, mija, sun and moon will own something that never sets." Inside were the final documents, transfer details, property assessments, and a letter from the board welcoming me officially as the new owner-operator of the Archibald Hotel. I pressed my fingers against the words, Marisol de la Cruz. Managing principal, it felt like fire and stillness all at once. I went in early the next morning, not for work, just to walk the halls before the guests woke up, to feel the heartbeat of the building. The lobby lights were still dim. The fountain trickled like soft breath. Behind the front desk, Julia was yawning, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I passed. The cafe was quiet. Housekeeping carts were lined up like soldiers awaiting command. The staff hadn't arrived yet, but I paused near the breakfast room and ran my fingers along the wall. I had plans for this space. Local artwork, warm tones. A welcome station that offered cafecito and horchata with the same reverence as a cappuccino. This place would change, not just the decor, the culture, the assumptions, the invisible lines drawn between who was front of house and who was meant to be erased behind it. 2 days before the closing, Julia called a staff meeting in the Magnolia Room. It was the usual dress code reminders, passive-aggressive bullet points about tone, and a thinly veiled warning that new ownership could mean structural cuts. I sat in the back, quietly taking notes on who made eye contact and who snickered. Claiborne stood at the end and gave some vague speech about embracing change and trusting the leadership transition, clearly still thinking someone from corporate would stroll in and turn the place into a Marriott clone. No one had told him yet, and I wasn't going to be the one to do it. Not yet. But when I stood up to leave, Julia called out from the front, "Oh, Marisol, can you clean up the coffee spill by the back door before you go?" I stared at her. She didn't even wait for a response, just turned back to her clipboard. The stain was small, probably from the intern. But I knelt down, grabbed a napkin, and wiped it slowly, steadily. Let them think I was still on my knees. They had no idea I was just picking the right moment to rise. The morning of the transition, I wore white. Not for symbolism, not for drama, just because it felt clean. A sleeveless white blouse, pressed slacks, soft gold earrings my mother gave me when I turned 21. I left my name tag in the drawer where I kept spare batteries and old receipts. Didn't need it anymore. At 7:45 a.m. I walked into the Archibald for the last time as an employee. At 8 a.m. I would walk through it again, this time as owner. Arturo arrived first, holding the manila folder with the final closing paperwork. Behind him came Cheryl, the banker, in a crisp blazer and soft smile. And then a representative from the city licensing office who shook my hand and said, "It's rare to see a transition like this done so cleanly. Congratulations, ma'am." Ma'am. Not miss, not sweetheart. Just ma'am. It was quiet in the lobby. Most of the staff had no idea what was coming. Claiborne was in his office poring over an old guest complaint file like it mattered. Julia was behind the desk, checking in a couple from Des Moines who looked as tired as they did curious. She glanced up and saw me standing near the fountain, her brows knit, confused. "Marisol, are you off today?" I smiled. "You could say that." Before she could ask more, I stepped into the center of the lobby and tapped the brass bell on the counter twice. Ding, ding. Everyone looked up. Housekeeping paused with their carts. Front desk agents froze mid-sentence. The cafe server stopped pouring a latte. Even Claiborne stepped out, blinking like he'd just woken from a nap in someone else's dream. I spoke calmly. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" Arturo handed me the folder. I held it up, unsealed and signed. As of this morning, I am the new owner and managing principal of the Archibald Hotel. The room went silent. One of the bellhops dropped a room key. A housekeeper covered her mouth. With her hand, Claiborne let out a forced laugh. What is this, some kind of joke? I looked him in the eye. No. This is what happens when someone you ignored decides to stop waiting for permission. Julia blinked rapidly, the blood draining from her face. But how? I'm everything you never saw. And I own the building now. It wasn't rage or a speech. It wasn't revenge in fire or fury. It was just truth. I turned to the staff. For those of you who've worked hard, who've gone unnoticed, who've been treated like background noise, you're not invisible anymore. If you've got heart, you've got a future here. Then I turned back to Julia. And for those who've used their title to make others feel small, consider this your formal notice. Your contract is terminated, effective immediately. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. You can clock out on your way out. Claiborne stammered something about corporate procedure and employment law, but I was already walking past him. To be clear, I said without looking back, this hotel is no longer under corporate ownership. It's independent, privately held, and I'm not keeping anyone who can't say my name. That afternoon I walked behind the front desk. I ran my fingers along the counter Julia once guarded like a fortress. Then I stepped around and stood behind it. Not on the guest side. Not near the mop bucket, behind it. Exactly where I'd been told I didn't belong. But this time I wasn't checking people in, I was deciding what happened next. We closed early that evening for renovations. That was the start of the transformation. The Archibald became Casa Sol, a boutique hotel rooted in heritage, hospitality, and real inclusion. We hired local. We offered classes for staff who wanted to grow into leadership. We didn't punish accents, we celebrated them. The lobby art changed, the music changed, the energy changed. And me? I still walked the floors every morning, still checked on linens, still helped guests with directions. But every time I passed that front desk, I smiled, because it was mine now. The place they told me I didn't belong. The seat they thought I couldn't earn. The job they said I didn't look right for. I didn't. Just take it, I owned it.